This video was brought to you by Brilliant. Since the legislative elections in early July, French politics has been stuck in a deadlock. No party has anywhere near an outright majority, and post-Olympics negotiations look almost counterproductive, because after French President Emmanuel Macron refused to allow the Leftwing coalition basically any input in government, they've rallied together. And the largest party in the coalition, Jean-Luc Mélenchon's France Unbowed, is now threatening to impeach Macron. So in this video, we're going to take a look at what's happened over the last few days, why a new coalition looks increasingly unlikely, and what might happen next. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So, let's start with a quick recap. As you might remember, at the French legislative elections, no party won an outright majority, or frankly anything like an outright majority. In the 577-seat chamber, which requires 289 seats for a majority, the left-wing New Popular Front coalition won 182 seats, Macron's centrist coalition won 168, and the right-wing National Rally won 143. This meant that forming a governing coalition was always going to be difficult, especially given not just the fractious nature of the results, but also the ideological divide between the various groups. Much here depends on Macron, who has to nominate a prime minister and therefore a government, which then needs a functioning majority in the legislature, or at least enough support to survive any no-confidence votes, known in France as censure votes. Anyway, in the immediate aftermath of the results, Macron made his preferred outcome clear, calling for the creation of a moderate coalition by parties that identify with Republican institutions, rule of law, parliamentarianism, a pro-European stance, and French independence. This is basically Macron's way of saying he wants anyone but the National Rally and Jean-Luc Mélenchon's France Unbowed party. Others in the Macronist camp, particularly those from the right, like former Prime Minister Edouard Philippe, have explicitly called for some kind of deal for a centre-right minority government, including Macron's alliance and the Republicans. However, this hasn't happened yet, both because the Republicans have ruled out a formal coalition, and because it's not clear a minority government could survive a censure vote. Anyway, whatever permutation Macron attempts, a broad moderate coalition would be tricky, given that it would likely include, for example, both the left-wing socialists and the conservative Republicans, and require someone like the socialists to splinter off from the NPF. With this in mind, Macron said that he wanted to allow time for parliamentary groups to work things out before he names his new prime minister, requesting that Gabriel Attal, who has tendered his resignation, stay on in a caretaker capacity during this time. Now, having taken a break for the Olympics, in the past week or so, negotiations have resumed, but they've gone pretty terribly. Conscious of the fact that any explicitly left-wing candidate would be unlikely to garner a majority in the legislature, the left-wing alliance proposed a civil servant and economist called Lucie Castet as their candidate for prime minister. While Castet is associated with the socialists, she's nonetheless a far less political candidate than other potential NPF candidates, and her selection was a surprisingly conciliatory gesture from the NPF. Nonetheless, Macron refused her candidacy, apparently on the grounds that even if the government was headed up by Castet or someone relatively moderate, he wouldn't accept a government with any ministers from France Unbowed. In response, Mélenchon essentially called Macron's bluff, saying that he would accept a left-wing government even without any ministers from his party. This unified the NPF, which had previously been struggling with internal infighting over Mélenchon's calls for an impeachment, and the leader of the Socialists, the second largest party in the coalition, put out a tweet saying Macron's pretext no longer exists, demanding that Macron let the left form a government. However, over the past few days, Macron and his allies have responded by shifting the goalposts once again, insisting they wouldn't accept any government headed by Castet, because even if it didn't have any ministers from France Unbowed, it would still be influenced or in some way be directed by Mélenchon and his party. Attal went as far as promising that his party, presumably along with the National Rally, would immediately censure any left-wing government. In effect, this means that Macron has ruled out any government led by the winning coalition. In a press release on Monday night, Macron argued that this is because any Castet government would lack a functioning majority. But Well, that's in part because Macron's own party has threatened to immediately censure it. This sparked fury across the left. France Unbowed accused Macron of an anti-democratic coup and released a press statement announcing that they will be pursuing impeachment proceedings against Macron, calling for a firm response from French society against this incredible abuse of autocratic power. The socialist leader even ominously warned that the Republic was born from the rejection of personal power, and announced on Tuesday morning that he will be boycotting all future negotiations. While the Communist Party's leader called for a grand popular mobilization and ruled out a fresh round of talks, and the Green Party's leader said that the people must get rid of Macron for the good of democracy. So what's going to happen next? Well, the first thing to say is that impeachment is very unlikely, largely because the process, known in France as destitution, requires support from 2/3 of MPs in both houses of the French parliament. So the most significant consequence of this spat is probably that it makes coalition negotiations even more difficult, because the more moderate elements of the MPF, like say the socialists, are now very unlikely to splinter off or support any centrist government. If anything, it's actually made it far more likely that these parties would vote against any centrist government in a no-confidence vote, which makes the prospect of a Macron-led minority government, which we talked about at the beginning of this video, even more unlikely. On top of this, Macron's escalating unpopularity means that other parties have even less of an incentive to work with his coalition, because they don't want to be tarnished by association, and instead they often believe that the electorally optimal path is to stay out of government and spend the next few months criticizing Macron for his apparent intransigence. Ultimately, a coalition now looks even less likely than it did before the Olympics. And if no agreement can be reached, then France will be stuck with a caretaker government, presumably led by Attal, until a year has passed since the elections, when new elections can be held. Now, obviously no one knows what the future holds, but it's hard to imagine this being good for Macron politically. Not only will he be held responsible for calling the elections in the first place, but voters on the left and right will feel that his stubbornness has denied them proper democratic representation. Understanding these sorts of issues is really important, but also difficult, and that's why TLDR is here to help you. Unfortunately though, the world's only getting more complex, especially when it comes to things like tech and AI, and I'm not qualified to teach you about that. But luckily, Brilliant are. Brilliant is where you learn by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in maths, data analysis, programming, and AI. In fact, Brilliant is a learning platform designed to be uniquely effective. Their first principles approach helps you to build understanding from the ground up. Each lesson is filled with hands-on problem solving that lets you play with concepts, a method proven to be 6 times more effective than watching lecture videos. For instance, if you did want to learn more about the increasingly important world of tech, then you might want to check out their How Technology Works courses. They run you through everything from how computer memory works to how exactly a GPS can pinpoint your location, or why some online videos buffer, and how compression enables modern streaming. And although I did throw myself under the bus earlier, and I'm not qualified to teach you about that, I do have a computer science degree, and I can tell you that these courses aren't just high quality, they're also far more interesting than the lectures I sat through. To try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/TLDR, or click the link in the description. That way you'll get 20% off an annual premium subscription, and they'll know you came from us.